All right. Make sure this is up and running. We're going to start? Cool. Nice. All right. So a little background on this. Let me make sure that I actually set this to public. Good. So the point of this live stream is going to be to explore the reasons why I actually bought and why I'm returning the Sony AX53. Get that right? Yeah. I bought this camera yesterday, ran it through a couple of tests, and I really, I guess I had more expectations for it than it was able to meet. So I just wanted to detail the reasons why I bought it and then why ultimately I am going to be returning this camera to Best Buy. Great. So to jump right into it, the big thing that we want to focus on is, first off, why I bought it, the expectations that I had sort of going into this camera, and those are important, and it does determine sort of why I bought this piece of software that I did. First thing is, I wanted to be able to use it as a webcam via HDMI so that my audio would be in sync. Now, you could say, well, what am I doing right now if I'm not using that camera? And right now I'm running through my Canon T6i through USB, using sort of a workaround to the EOS webcam utility. I'm running it through Camera Live and then CamTwist. And then I am running this Shure SM57 just into a Focusrite Scarlett that is then going into OBS, which I can then use the audio delay to get that in sync. And that works very well for this setting. However, especially being a teacher and doing this remote learning thing, I'm going to be using Zoom a lot. I'm using Google Hangouts a lot. And even though OBS has the webcam function, it doesn't transmit audio. And so every workaround that I've tried, and I've tried a lot of them, they have not really been able to get the sync within, 4 or 5 frames, which ends up being a bit too much and honestly just annoys me. I know a lot of people wouldn't notice, but I need to like what I'm putting out. So the goal then was to get a camera where I could plug the output of all of my audio processing just straight into the camera and then bring the signal in through HDMI. I do have a camera that can do this, but the problem is the image quality isn't very good. So I wanted sort of a catch-all camera to do that, to run through my HDMI capture card. So that is the main reason, I would say more than anything else, why I bought it. I did want to be able to shoot in 4K. That one wasn't as much of a selling point, but it's nice to have because if I'm filming lessons and things along those lines, the ability to crop in afterwards and just export in 1080p is a huge deal. So moving on from that, I have the blurry background from my T6i. Sorry, I'm just checking the stream here, see if anybody is in. Huh, nice. So looking here at the didn't need blurry background thing, I don't really care about depth of field when I'm shooting educational videos. I do have DSLRs. I have a Canon T6i and then a T2i actually, and I'm using the T6i for this right now. I can get what I need to out of the DSLRs. Also, if I'm shooting lessons, I don't want to have to worry about things being in focus. The autofocus on the AX53 is solid. I don't, I had no complaints about that, and we'll see that in a moment. And then the last thing is, I thought I'd test it out before splurging on a more expensive camera. I do have a more expensive camera in my lens, the Canon GX10, but that's almost twice the price, and so, especially on sale right now. So I just figured I would test this one first, have appropriate expectations maybe for it, and then see what happens there. So that is why I bought the camera. We're now going to move on to what it did well. So to start off, The autofocus was actually really good, and this is something that's really important to me. I generally do light things well. I usually have enough light coming into the camera. So low light autofocus, though I know it can be tricky on some cameras, isn't a thing that I'm really going to run into. But the autofocus performed well. I mean, I tested it out, threw it around towards some faces, and it was good. The image quality was fine. For a camcorder, it was quite good. There was a decent amount of dynamic range in there, which I almost wasn't expecting with a camcorder at this price. However, it did well. I could use the image from this camera. I would feel comfortable using it for lessons and things like that. It wasn't anything super spectacular. I mean, it has a 1/2.5 inch sensor. So in low light, it did start to get a little bit noisy, but again, for what it is, the image quality was good. Sound quality was excellent. Even just from the mics on the camera, it was doing well. I tested it out in sort of my noisy, reverberant basement, and it did a really good job at being cardioid when it needed to, not letting the reflections of the room get too much in the way. I didn't actually, admittedly, try running anything into the mic jack to test the preamps. I kind of knew already that I wasn't going to be keeping this camera for the reasons we'll talk about, but from what I've heard, the preamps are fine. It adapts quickly. What do I mean by that? So it adapts quickly. The white balance adjusts really, really fast for better or for worse. So if you point it at a tungsten light, it'll change, and then as soon as you point it out the window, you can see the audio quality, or the white balance, start to immediately shift back. Now again, this is for better or for worse. So as you can see right now, I do have a light on top of my camera with some diffusion over it. That is just pure white, daylight balanced. But then I do have this orange light in the background. Now the T2i, I can set the white balance, or sorry, the T6i, I can set the white balance so it works. However, the Sony was struggling a lot with that orange light. And anytime I was in a situation where there were reflections of light coming off the walls, this room is wood colored, it was starting to struggle a little bit, and you would constantly see the white balance starting to shift. So it adapts quickly, but sometimes a little bit too quickly. Moving on from that, we do have why I am returning it. So before I dive into these, let us check the stream. Ooh, we have 2 people in here. How you guys doing? If you have any questions, leave them down below, and I will definitely answer some of those before I end this live stream. Cool. Now, why I am returning it. So the first thing, and I just alluded to this, is that it gets easily overwhelmed in uneven lighting scenarios. So my current lighting setup is a big example of that. I have the, again, daylight balanced light, not very strong, but it is there on top of my T2i. Just for reference, so you know how bright this light is, I'm at a 2.8 right now, 24 millimeter 2.8, and my ISO is at 800. So I wasn't too worried about noise because I'm live streaming at 720, so it was basically going to mask a lot of that noise. But this light is not excessively bright. The light back there isn't any brighter than the windows are. And the Sony was starting to get a little bit, with that lighting. You saw a lot of banding. The orange got totally blown out. It was having a lot of trouble figuring out those colors. And then, even though the rest of the room was pretty hot in terms of lighting, it was still causing overexposure on my face, just having this light on the camera, which again is not any brighter than the windows around me. So it was having a little bit of trouble there. And so I was, getting a little bit concerned. I am a little spoiled because I am using a DSLR, but again, it was to the point where I just couldn't really use it, and it wasn't very effective. So the other thing, and I am actually going to end up adding something to this list. I'll just add it in quickly right now. So before we get to number 2, there is an app where you can remotely control the AX53, and I thought it was going to be a lot more versatile than it was. The issue that I ended up having with it I thought I was going to be able to adjust actual settings on the camera from the app, but all you can do from what I've seen and testing it out and troubleshooting it, all you can really do is start and stop recording and zoom in and out. So it doesn't really end up being that effective, especially for the last reason of why I'm returning it, which is you can only set one setting at a time in terms of exposure to manual. So what do I mean by that? When I was pointing the camera at the setup that you see now, I was getting overexposed. What I did was then I went into the menu, put it on manual mode, went to my exposure, and opened it up all the way to F2 because I was like, I might as well try to let as much light in as possible, try to reduce my noise. So then I could drop the other settings to, make the image darker, let less light into the camera. So I then went to my ISO setting, gain setting, whichever you want to call it. DSLR land and camcorder land are different in that regard. And then I set it, and my exposure immediately went back to auto. So my image ended up getting blown out again. So I was like, oh, that's weird. So I set the exposure back to auto, and then this time went to try to set my shutter speed. And so I set my shutter speed, and then my exposure went back to auto. And it was like, okay. And then, And then as I looked at it, I realized that it was literally just only letting you set one thing to manual at a time. And a lot of this, I'm sure, is to be idiot proof. So if you have somebody who's not really used to camcorders and they change a setting, that it won't cause their image to be poorly exposed. That is great for the average consumer user who's just filming events, filming concerts, filming soccer games, things like that. But in terms of what I'm doing here, I really need that control. I can do that on my phone. I can do that. I can use my GoPros as a webcam with my HDMI capture, and I can do that with the GoPros. I can set them to, a flat color profile, set the max ISO that they're allowed to use. You can't set manual exposure as easily, but it almost feels better to know that you have no control over it than to just be able to set one thing, because then the other settings will overcompensate. So that was something that I was really struggling with. You do have the exposure compensation, which is okay, but then you have other things about your image still shifting. You have the trade-off between shutter speed and exposure. You have aperture rather. You have the trade-off between ISO and exposure, ISO and shutter speed. And so you still end up getting this weird shift in the quality of your image without even being able to keep it consistent for a second. So that was the biggest reason out of all of them that I am going to be returning this camera and just getting something even at a similar price point that has pure manual control where you can actually set an image and lock it in. So when it comes down to it, do I think that this is a bad camera? No, not at all. I think that this is a high quality consumer camcorder, but it's not a low level professional camcorder, if that makes sense. In terms of having high quality consumer versus low level professional, there's lots of time this gray area where you don't know which of the two that you're getting. This is definitely designed to be a high quality sort of amateur camcorder. Don't expect the functionality that you would get out of a low-end professional camcorder. You're basically trading a good image that you would get with the AX53 with the functionality that you would get with a professional camcorder. So it really depends on what's important to you. Do you care about having functionality and letting your image suffer a tiny bit, possibly? In that case, go with a cheaper professional camcorder, which can be confusing because sometimes they might be the same price. If you just want a camera that you're going to open up and just shoot and you're not going to mess with any settings and you're going to let the camera take the wheel, then this camera is actually really, really good. So again, it's a really high quality consumer amateur camcorder and not a low-end professional camcorder. The bottom line that I put here in terms of the camcorder, if I had to describe it in one sentence, it's a high-quality, idiot-proof camera for the average user, but as soon as you need more advanced functionality, it hits a wall. And I definitely found that to be true. So, as I said, I will be returning it. However, I can recommend it for somebody who just, again, wants to open up their camera and have it work. So thank you for stopping by to check this out. I see the one and or two people, maybe just one person in here watching it. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. Let me know your experience that you had with this camera. And I look forward to chatting with you soon. Thanks for stopping by.